Viola, my downstairs neighbour, asked me to look after her dog while she was away. How could I refuse? She's a lovely girl, neat with an upturned nose, dark eyebrows, grey eyes, and soft copper hair that falls gently over her shoulders. But the most captivating thing about her was her smile. Every time Viola laughed, her face seemed to light up. In general, she was a cheerful and pleasant person, and her dog was equally charming. A short-legged brown bulldog named Twix, with a drooping muzzle and protruding fangs. Just looking at him made me want to laugh. I was happy to lend a hand, especially since it didn't interfere with my work schedule. Plus, she promised to pay me 5,000 rubles upon her return, an acceptable though modest sum. Viola, you'll need to walk him twice a day, morning and evening. Feed him once a day, make sure he has water, and give him some scratches so he doesn't get bored. Of course, no problem. I knew Twix was a friendly dog and would be easy to manage. He always greeted me warmly in the yard. Viola, come by tomorrow to pick up the key. I'll show you everything. I'll be gone for 5 days, 6 at most. And where are you going? Viola, I'm heading to Sochi to ski. Do you know how to ski? Viola, not really. I only went sledding as a child and I never got around to learning. Well, I recommend you try it sometime. We agreed and she smiled before heading out. The next day, after work, I arrived at Viola's apartment. Twix greeted me at the door, wagging his tail and almost knocking me over. He was clumsy but lovable, slouching and grunting as he bounded around. Viola, don't worry about cleaning. I'll take care of everything when I get back. It's no trouble. Viola's apartment was cosy and tidy, unlike my own, which was always cluttered. The living room had soft cream-coloured wallpaper, a light wood coffee table, a sofa, a TV and a bookcase. Dried flowers adorned the hall, and white candles rested on the windowsills, which were draped with translucent curtains. On the walls there were framed photographs, Viola with her dog with friends, on a snowboard in the mountains, on a beach with a surfboard. The kitchen was simple but efficient, with a spice rack and 2 ferns on the windowsill. Viola, I usually cook him porridge with canned food, but I won't bother you with that. He'll be fine on dry food for a few days. Just make sure he has plenty of water. Oh, and after each walk make sure to wash his paws. He can get a bit muddy. Got it. Viola? Also, if you want, you can sit in the living room with him in the evenings. He likes to watch movies with me and rests his head on my legs while I scratch him. Just don't bring anyone over, please. I've put a lot of effort into this place, and I worry about it. I reassured her I'd keep everything in order. She handed me the keys and reminded me to send updates about Twix if anything urgent came up. Once she left, I took over the dog's care. We went for walks in the park near the apartment. Afterward, I washed Twix's paws, and he sulked a little, not immediately eating. He jumped onto the sofa, looking a bit forlorn, as if he hadn't quite accepted being left with a stranger. Come on, you know me, I'm a good guy. We'll be friends, you'll see. He turned away, but I patted his head and wished him good night before heading to my room. The whole thing took about 2 hours each day. Not a big deal, but it made me wonder. Maybe keeping animals was easier than it seemed, offering a bit of companionship in an otherwise lonely world. I thought about how it helped me cope with the endless and fruitless correspondence on social networks. On day 2, I woke up early and headed down to my neighbour's apartment. Twix, the bulldog, had clearly forgotten about his earlier grudge. He greeted me with excited energy, wagging his tail so hard it almost made him lose his balance as he tried to reach my face with his tongue. "Stop it, Twix! Stay still!" I said, trying to attach the leash to his collar. But Twix was too excited and broke loose, jumping around and spinning in delight at the fact that he had finally been visited. Amidst this excitement, I put my phone on the nightstand next to the mirror so it wouldn't get in the way. I forgot to take it with me when I left the apartment. It wasn't until we were walking in the park that I noticed the phone was missing. I had wanted to take a picture of Twix for Viola to show her everything was fine. At first, I wasn't too concerned, but when we returned to the apartment, I checked the nightstand and the phone wasn't there. I distinctly remembered leaving it there. I looked around the apartment. Nothing seemed out of place. Twix patiently waited on the rug for me to wash his paws. "Okay, I'll find it later," I said, taking off my shoes and heading for the bathroom. But my surprise came when I saw the phone lying on the sink. How could it have gotten there? I hadn't been into the bathroom, much less placed the phone there. Even more unsettling was the state of the phone. The protective glass had cracked, with a web of cracks stretching across the screen, as if someone had taken it and thrown it into the sink. My heart sank. Could someone have been here while I was out? Then I heard a fierce bark from Twix. He stood in the living room, his dirty paws on the carpet, staring at the bedroom door. The fur on his withers stood up, and he was looking at something behind the half-open door. I immediately thought someone might have broken in. Maybe an ex or a thief who had tried to unlock the phone and, in a fit of frustration, tossed it into the sink. I called out, "Hey, show yourself!" My voice sounded unnaturally low and rough, not like me at all. I took a few tentative steps toward the bedroom. Peeking inside, I saw no one. The bed wasn't disturbed, and there was no sign of anyone hiding under it. I even checked the bathroom and other rooms, but everything was quiet. It felt like no one had been in the apartment, but the phone still lay there with no explanation. I didn't want to trouble Viola with something so trivial, so I decided I'd mention it to her later. When I returned home after work that evening, Twix greeted me with enthusiasm, stepping on my feet in his excitement as though we hadn't seen each other for years. But I felt a strange anxiety in my chest. I hurriedly attached his leash and decided to take him for a walk to shake off the uneasy feeling. As I bent down to attach the carabiner to Twix's collar, I noticed something odd. It felt like a shadow or a figure was looming over me just out of sight. I jerked my head up, but there was nothing there. The hallway was empty, but that moment of certainty left me feeling unsettled. Twix remained calm, quietly watching me with his intense gaze. It was as if he sensed something was off too. I took out my phone and dialed Viola. "Hey," I said, my voice trembling, "is everything okay at your apartment?" "Everything's fine," she replied, sounding surprised. "Why? What's going on?" "I don't know," I stammered. I thought I saw someone, but I guess it was nothing. My imagination, maybe." Viola sounded confused, but reassured me, asking, "How's Twix?" "He's doing fine," I said, relieved to change the subject. "We're just about to go for a walk." "Can you take a couple of photos for me?" Viola asked. "I miss my little bundle of joy so much." "Sure," I replied, still feeling uneasy. I took a photo of Twix and sent it to her. As I did, I thought it was strange how Twix reacted. He barked and spun around, looking for Viola, but then he started whining sadly. Viola chuckled over the phone. "I can't wait to get back. Thanks again for helping out." "Of course," I said, hanging up, feeling slightly better but still on edge. Day 3 came, and I didn't have to wake up early. After a slow start with coffee and a shower, I made my way down to Viola's apartment. As expected, Twix greeted me with his usual excitement. I attached the leash to his collar and led him out. Hoping the walk would clear the strange feeling that had been haunting me, I promised myself not to be so suspicious. After all, I thought, maybe I was just imagining things. I figured after the walk I could spend the rest of the day at Viola's apartment to keep Twix company, watch a movie, throw the ball around for the bulldog, and keep him entertained. But when we stepped outside into the yard, I ran into an elderly neighbour. I didn't remember her name, but I always saw her around. She wore a red beret and seemed to have an opinion about everything. "Oh, did you marry a fork or something?" she asked bluntly, looking at Twix as if trying to piece together some mysterious detail. I couldn't help but laugh. There was something oddly pleasing about her casual observation. "No, why would you think that?" I responded, chuckling a little. "Well, I just noticed you walking with Twix," she replied, squinting at the dog, "and I wondered if Viola was sick or something." "No, she's fine. She just went on vacation," I explained, ready to be on my way. But the woman suddenly looked at me with a raised eyebrow. "How long ago did she leave?" 3 days ago," I answered. She nodded, but then frowned. Of course, but I saw Viola standing at the window yesterday, waving to me." I paused, my mind racing. What? That couldn't be right. No, that's not possible, I muttered, trying to brush aside the rising feeling of anxiety. The woman must have mixed something up. Or maybe it was a coincidence, something stranger than usual. The neighbour didn't seem to notice my discomfort. "Oh, there she is!" she exclaimed, pointing upwards. I turned around, confused, and looked up at the window where she was pointing. My heart stopped. There, in the kitchen window, was someone standing. At first I thought it was Viola, but as my eyes adjusted I saw it wasn't her. No, it was something far worse. The figure's eyes were bright and reptilian, its nose pointed, and its skin looked sickly and stretched. It smiled, showing crooked yellow teeth, and waved down at us. Twix barked sharply, his fur standing on end. He had sensed it too. This wasn't Viola, it wasn't even human. I froze, staring in horror, unable to speak. The elderly woman seemed completely unbothered. "Good morning, Viola," she waved back casually, then turned and walked away. I stood there in stunned silence as the distorted figure in the window disappeared. "Poor liar," the neighbour muttered under her breath as she walked off. I couldn't move. I barely processed what I'd just seen, but I knew one thing for sure. I wouldn't be going back to Viola's apartment, not after that. Twix, who had been acting a little out of sorts, seemed relieved to be in a familiar place when I brought him back to my apartment. I felt bad for the poor dog. His confusion was obvious, and I knew he missed his owner. I didn't dare go back for his food or bowls. Instead, I found a basin, washed Twix's paws, and let him into my living room. "Make yourself at home," I said, feeling guilty for what he must have felt. I sat down and typed a quick message to Viola. "Hello, Viola. Twix was bored alone, so I took him to my place. It'll be more convenient for me to keep an eye on him here." She replied shortly, "Okay, thanks for taking care of him." A little while later, she sent a follow-up. "Thank you for looking after him." I sighed in relief, feeling like I was doing the right thing by keeping him close. I put Twix's food and water bowls in my kitchen and bought a small bag of good-quality dog food. Twix ate eagerly, and for a brief moment things felt normal again. For the next 3 days, Twix became more and more comfortable in my place. I started to enjoy his company too. He had this uncanny ability to lift my spirits, acting like a carefree, happy dog. He checked out every corner of my apartment and always seemed to be in the mood to play. He would curl up next to me on the couch, and I realized how much joy an animal could bring, even in the midst of strange and unsettling events. But the memory of what happened never left me. That distorted version of Viola, her eerie reptilian eyes, kept replaying in my mind. Was I going crazy? Every time I went outside and looked at the windows of her apartment, I tried to see if I could spot something, but there was nothing. The thoughts were obsessive, relentless, like a storm in my head. On the last evening before Viola was due to return, I received a message from her. "I'm leaving the station soon. I'll come for Twix. I miss him so much." "Okay, we're waiting," I replied. Twix, sprawled out on the sofa, didn't seem overly excited to see his owner return. I wasn't sure why I was feeling so uneasy. I'd been looking forward to it, but somehow her arrival didn't feel like a happy reunion. 30 minutes later, a furious knock came at the door. I opened it, and Viola stood there, pale and breathing heavily, her eyes wide with panic. "What the hell happened here?" she shouted in my face. I was taken aback. "What do you mean? I didn't do anything, I swear." Viola didn't listen to me. Her eyes were filled with fear, and her voice trembled. "Why is my apartment like this? What happened?" She stepped into the hallway, taking the leash from the hook. "Let's go. I need to see what you did." I followed her down to the apartment, my heart pounding in my chest. When we opened the door, I was hit with chaos. The mirror in the hallway was shattered. The drawer from the nightstand was lying on the floor. In the kitchen, flower pots were overturned, jars of spices scattered, and some strange residue smeared across the floor. In the living room, furniture had been overturned, photographs torn, and belongings thrown everywhere. My breath caught in my throat. "Viola, I swear I didn't do this," I managed to say. I need to tell you something. There's something incredible happening here." Viola didn't even hear me. She was too focused on the mess, but I knew I couldn't keep this to myself anymore. "Remember when I called you, asking if anything strange was happening in your apartment? Well, there's someone else in your apartment. It's not you. Someone or something else is living there." I was terrified. I had seen it with my own eyes, the evil spirits or whatever they were. I couldn't stay in that apartment any longer. That's why I took Twix into my place. I didn't want to leave him there, not with whatever presence haunted that space. 2 large tears rolled down Viola's cheeks, merging into one on her chin as she stood there, trembling with emotion. "Give me the keys and get out of here," she said, her voice cold and harsh. "Don't expect anything from me." I wanted to ask for a moment to explain everything, about what I had seen, what had been happening, but before I could get a word in, Viola screamed at the top of her lungs. "I said, give me the keys and get out of here, or I'll call the police." What else could I do? I didn't want to make things worse. Slowly I handed the keys over to her, feeling a lump form in my throat. I left without saying anything more. It was clear she didn't believe me. How could she? All I had was strange stories about shadows, barks at nothing, and a phone mysteriously appearing in the sink. The door slammed behind me, and I said a quiet goodbye to Twix. As I left, the dog bit his rear end in frustration and whimpered, sensing the tension. Viola didn't even speak to me as I left, and when we accidentally crossed paths later on the street, she simply ignored me, yanking the leash on Twix and pulling him away as if I were a stranger. It felt unjust. I hadn't done anything wrong. I was only trying to help her, but somehow I'd become an enemy in her eyes. She didn't even try to talk to me, as if everything I'd said had been a lie. At least she didn't report me to the police or demand compensation for the damages. I couldn't understand why she was so adamant about rejecting my help. I often wondered why the entity in the apartment had been so quiet around Viola. Why it hadn't shown itself to her the way it did to me. Maybe it was scared of being discovered, or maybe it just knew how to hide its true form. The neighbour would never believe me, of course. She would always see me as the crazy one, the person who had ruined Viola's perfect home. But then, one day, something changed. Viola called out to me from across the street. My heart skipped a beat as I stopped and waited, unsure of what to expect. She approached cautiously, her head down. "Hi," she said quietly, her voice soft and uncertain. "Hi," I replied, swallowing hard, unsure of what was going on. Viola took a deep breath. "Please forgive me," she whispered, looking at the ground. I realize now that you were right. There are spirits in my apartment." I was taken aback. "You saw them?" I asked, my voice catching. Viola shook her head, looking up at me with tear-filled eyes. "No, I didn't see them, but I know something's wrong. People who visit the apartment all feel uncomfortable, like something's watching them. They say it's just their imagination, but I hear Twix howling at the corners of the rooms. And the neighbour, she said she saw me standing by the window all day, even though I wasn't home." For the first time I was able to explain everything I had witnessed while Viola was away in Sochi. I told her about the phone that ended up in the sink, about Twix barking at the empty room, about the shadow that had hovered over me, and about the eerie version of her in the window. "What a nightmare," Viola whispered, her voice trembling. "Why can't you see it? Why is it just me?" I wondered aloud. Viola shook her head. "I don't know. Maybe it likes you. I don't want to live with it anymore. I don't know what to do." I could see the fear in her eyes. It was the same fear I had felt. I wasn't sure what the right answer was, but I remembered something my mother had said when I was younger. "Maybe you should sprinkle holy water in the corners," I suggested. "Read a prayer, or even walk around with a church candle. My mother used to do that when she thought something evil was near. It helped." Viola looked doubtful, but she nodded. "I'll try it. Thank you." The next day I heard a scream. It was so loud it rattled the radiators in the hallway. Then there was silence, only the sound of a dog howling in the distance. I ran to the entrance, my heart racing with dread. The door to Viola's apartment was wide open, as if something or someone wanted me to see. I rushed inside, and there in the living room, Viola lay lifeless on the floor, her mouth and eyes still open in a silent scream. A church candle, extinguished, was gripped tightly in her hand. Twix, his face full of sorrow, was sitting next to her, nudging her with his muzzle and howling in despair. He knew what had happened. I called an ambulance and the police immediately, but it was too late. The doctors confirmed what I feared. Viola had died from what seemed like a heart attack. The authorities theorized that the stress of the situation had caused it, especially after they discovered that she had been exposed to the strange presence in the apartment for so long. Twix was left alone, abandoned by the one person who had meant everything to him. I couldn't let that happen. I couldn't leave him an orphan. So I took him in. We became true friends, comforting each other through the shared pain of loss. Every day Twix and I would go for walks, and without fail he would stop in front of the building where Viola had lived. He would sniff the air and quietly whine, as if he were still waiting for her to come back. I would smile softly and pat his head, but in my heart I knew that Viola was gone, and we would have to come to terms with it. Life went on, and I learned to embrace it with Twix by my side, my loyal companion through the most difficult time of my life. But sometimes, when the world is quiet, I remember the haunting figure in the window. And I wonder if there are still other things unseen that continue to haunt the places we leave behind. As for Viola, I'll never forget her. But I know one thing for sure. Some evil forces never fully leave, even when we try to move on.